3 days of evidence, lots of questions to answer. Many of those who were impacted by the actions of the Post Office and the scandal that ensued will be in the audience to hear what Paula Vennells, now an ordained priest, will have to say for herself. Will they get an apology? Will they get some answers? Paul Kelso is outside Aldwych House for us. That was quite a media scrum, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. You will have seen a few down the years, Kay, and I've seen some too, but that really was an indication. It doesn't always look the most seemly affair, but an indication of the media interest and perhaps a reasonable warm-up for Ms Vennells about what she can expect from the inquiry over the next 3 days. If that was a tough entrance, she faces some very, very tough questions. This was the woman who was in charge of the Post Office from 2012 to 2019, the period during which sub-postmasters were not just being wrongfully convicted, but then the Post Office went through a period that looks like a cover-up, even at this distance, before we've heard from her, not just attempting to obscure the failures of the Horizon IT system on which the Post Office was basing its flawed prosecutions, but aggressively pursuing its own staff, even after those failings had been exposed to the company. It's nearly 10 years since Paula Vennells spoke willingly in public about these. She appeared at a parliamentary select committee in 2015 when the Post Office was attempting to mediate with those sub-postmasters led by Alan Bates, who'd raised their concerns and believed their convictions were wrong. She was supposed to do so again in 2020, but COVID intervened. Well, since then, she's handed back her CBE. Remarkably, that was given to her after the High Court had found the Horizon system was flawed back in 2019. She's no longer a lay preacher with the Church of England. She had to be levered out of a role on an NHS hospital trust because other directors were not willing to sit with her. So a fall from grace has already effectively happened. But now she has to answer for what she knew and when she knew. Over the last month, the people who worked for her, many of them in the legal team, the investigations team and senior executives, have essentially said they couldn't recall, they weren't aware, they left it to others to make the key decisions about prosecution. But ultimately, the buck stops with the chief executive, and starting at 9:45, so a little over an hour and a half, she will begin answering for her actions.
Yeah, now she will be giving evidence, I believe, until the end of the week. As I was saying, Paul, many of those that were wronged by the Post Office and this Horizon scandal will be in the auditorium listening to what she has to say. It's costing an absolute fortune, this investigation, but they want answers. You were saying that many of those who were on the stand couldn't recall what had happened some time ago. Will that wash with her?
Well, we'll have to see how she approaches it. I rewatched that parliamentary select committee that I mentioned back in 2015 ahead of today. It's really remarkable to note how little she actually said. She was sat between her right-hand woman, Angela van den Boogaard, who dealt with all the detail of what the Post Office was doing with MPs, and on the other side of her was the independent forensic accountant from Second Sight, who had uncovered much of this wrongdoing, but were then sacked by Paula Vennells. And she sat in between, speaking very rarely, and when she did, she talked about how she assured MPs there were no failures with Horizon. We now know from this inquiry she'd been writing to staff ahead of that appearance, saying she wanted to be able to say there were no problems with Horizon and there was no way of remotely accessing the sub-postmasters' accounts to adjust them. Both of those things were happening, but it certainly looks from that correspondence like she was looking for the Post Office to be cleared rather than showing any inquisitiveness about whether this system was flawed. So I think a key question ultimately is, when did she know? Will she admit she knew? Again, she told in a correspondence to a parliamentary select committee she never got to appear at in 2020 that she accepted no personal criminal liability. And that ultimately is where many of those sub-postmasters who were sent to jail, remember, wrongfully, sent to jail. Seema Misra, who I expect will be here today, jailed while pregnant on her son's 10th birthday based for a theft she did not commit. They want the full weight of the law to now be borne down on Paula Vennells and anyone else if they are culpable. And it's worth remembering, what are we now? We're 15 years on, at least, from the first prosecutions. Post Office has acknowledged it is no secret that these were wrongful convictions, and still not a single individual has been held accountable in any kind of forum.
And just one more thought before I let you go, Paul. Sorry to keep you in the rain, but Lee Castleton, he was left with a massive bill of more than £300,000 after he had to pay the legal costs of the Post Office in the High Court. Janet Skinner, also a former sub-postmistress, sent to jail for crimes she did not commit. They were very noble today when they came onto the programme, saying they just wanted answers and they didn't bear her any ill will. They said that they would meet her if she wanted to. We have seen that from previous chief execs. Do you think that's something we might see from her?
Well, thus far, she hasn't shown any willingness to engage, certainly with media attempts to get her to acknowledge what she's wrong. It's a fascinating question about whether she'd meet them face to face. You mentioned there those stratospheric legal costs. That was a deliberate policy pursued by the Post Office. In that case, very early on, when these questions were being raised, to essentially outspend the sub-post office. They can't compete with £300,000 of legal spending. That was deliberate policy to make this go away by using their money to crush legally any opposition, never mind taking the arguments to court. For a long time, it worked. That implies a mindset, perhaps from the top down, from Paula Vennells, never to accept any culpability or that there might be something wrong. I'm sure that will be among the many questions over the next 3 days.
Absolutely.